Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jena Brown.
I'm Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers Inc. So I'm scrambling right now. We kind of talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but I've got a trip to Greece tomorrow it's basically there's a Facebook group of thriller fans that's just a little shy of 2 million members strong. It's a really big group. And every year they do these retreats where they take a couple of authors and they fly out to, some really cool remote place of the world. And, we hang out for like a week with, people that can go from the group and a couple of, writers. It's one of those things like it always sounds fantastic when I agree to these things, but then like when the day comes and all of a sudden, like I've got to scramble, because I'm going to be gone for 10, 12 days from the house and trying to knock out all these things. Like it's a lot. Like, do you,
Yeah.
do you guys
That's
feel that
my
way,
entire
when
life.
trips come up? So, okay. So I'm
Yeah.
not alone in that.
No, I'm always like, yeah, that sounds great. Oh, it's so much fun. And like, when it's a month out, I'm so excited about it and looking forward to it. And then it happens and I'm like, is it too late to cancel? I don't
Yeah.
really want to. Like, can we just not do it?
And,
Yeah.
Kara's been going with me to more author conferences the past couple of years. And I think she's finally starting to see why I always hedged when she would say, hey, why don't I tag along on this? Because we don't see each other. It's
Hmm.
not like we're on vacation. I'm not
Right.
going to be sitting there waiting, until you get up and then we go down to the beach or any of that. It's, I'm on the whole time. So
Yeah.
it's so disruptive to everything. So,
Hmm.
Yeah, well, that's the other piece of this, right? Because I was really hoping my wife and daughter would go, and one of the reasons why these people booked the trip for June is because my daughter is out of school. Like we were planning on bringing her, but my daughter, she's 7, she still doesn't have a passport, which is on
Mm.
me and my wife. Like we just haven't gotten one, and like we talked about it, and like every time it came up, well, we got 6 months, we've got 5 months, we've got 4 months, we've got 2 weeks, so now it's too late for that. And yeah, and Kevin, just like you pointed out, like you get to these things and like it may be a vacation for them, but I'm not going to be able to spend a whole lot of time
right.
with them because I'm getting pulled in other directions. And that's, I'm there because of the people that are doing the polling, so you have to figure that out too. So,
Yeah.
and my daughter right now, like she complains about a trip to like Walmart, which is 2 minutes down the street. So I can't imagine her, sitting still on a plane for 11 hours or 12 hours or whatever this is going to be.
Right. Yeah.
I'm the worst. I just like being at home. I would never go anywhere if my husband didn't make me go. He's like, "You're
Yeah.
going." I'm like, "Okay." But and I'm never looking forward to it. But I always have fun
Yeah.
when I get there. So
Hmm.
Yeah,
hopefully you'll have fun when you get there.
that is the
Sometimes I
plan.
don't. Sometimes I get there and I'm like, wow, this is really no fun. I would really rather be anywhere but here.
I think,
That's happened a few times.
I like the idea of, like back, in like the 1800s when like you would like I could summer someplace, it's like you
Yeah.
get you get there and then it's like you're not going anywhere for a while. So there's no like rush and there's no like, oh, we
Right.
have to do this. And then you get back and then you're just as tired because you crammed everything into this like week-long trip. Like I think that we should bring back the idea of
That
summering
that
places.
was
I just had a visual of, like how hard it is to get a carry-on bag on the airplane. I could just see somebody like traveling with those big wooden steamer
those
trunks.
trunks.
Days work.
Well, that was one of
Trying
the
to
things
get
that was really nice about when we were doing the whole van life thing, though, was we eventually got into a groove. Was like we were in a new place, but we have our routines.
Yeah.
We had our space, we had our stuff, and everything was with us, and so it was kind of that vibe. Like we're summering here. This is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
Jenna
My
where
needs
we
a
happen to
parents do
live.
cottage.
that. They have an RV, and so they'll do that when they go places. It's not it's a little bit nicer because you don't have to
Yeah.
Yeah,
rush. That's
get
the
to
hard
use my toilet, my shower.
part. Right.
well, yeah,
I have
and,
my
and sleep
pillow.
in your own bed, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a big part of this whole thing too. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
all right, I'll stop whining about going to Greece now.
yeah.
Yeah, JD.
Speaking of first
All
world
right,
problems,
yeah.
let's get to the news. Print royalty rate and paperback printing cost changes. On June 10th, Amazon lowered the royalty rate for certain print books. Specifically, books priced at $9.98 or less USD now earn 50% royalties instead of 60%. This applies to both paperback and hardcover formats, but not ebooks. If your print books are priced under $9.99, you are now earning less per sale. Additionally, books that moved to the 50% royalty rate also have a higher minimum list price. If your current price falls below that new threshold, you could earn nothing at all per sale.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
The
These things
minimum,
always
I
favor
was,
the
yeah,
house.
I was looking it up. The minimum depends on your pages and format. So they have a calculator on there that
Yeah.
you can go calculate what you need to be at minimum to make anything now with the changes. So
Yeah.
And
I
this
only
this is
had,
strictly KDP, right?
yeah, this is just KDP, specifically KDP print.
print,
Uh,
just
Okay.
print.
and yeah, I only had like one book that was impacted by this because I used KDP print for one of my nonfiction books, I think. So I all I did was change the price, but it annoys me though, because this is kind of the way it always goes with Amazon. It's like, oh, we're taking a hit, so the people that will be impacted will be the authors. We're going to make sure that you get less money unless you play by this rule.
Well, that's business all around. I mean,
I get
that's
it.
any business does that. Not that it helps or makes it right, but that is, I mean, that's how prices
To
go up
to
everywhere,
an
right?
extent, that's true. But like, and I know that companies like Walmart will often dictate like minimum pricing and things for actually what they generally dictate is like the margin for a
Yeah.
product, right? So we must make a certain margin and you can price whatever you want as long as they get that. But this is a lot like, Walmart dictating to the manufacturer of something, like you will price it at this and you will get this amount in margin, that
Well, yeah. I mean, like, usually though, like, I mean, some businesses will say that they don't pass the cost on to the consumer, but eventually it does get passed on to the consumer, whether they're open about it or not. Like, and I guess that's kind of what happens here. It's just that
yeah.
there's less of a supply chain when it comes to an author to the consumer. Somewhere like Walmart, you have like multiple stops along the way, so it's a little bit easier to,
Well, yeah, it is really a false comparison, honestly, because in this case, Amazon has some overhead involved. So,
yeah.
they do get a
I
say
know.
if if they're losing money because all your books are priced under a certain amount and they don't get, whatever. I mean, they do get some say in
Well,
that.
are they losing money though? Because if you think about the way that KDP screen, the pricing screen works, you
Yeah.
plug in whatever your sales price is, it tells you what your print cost is, and then it literally lights up in red and black, if you're
Yeah.
That's a
below.
good point. Yeah.
So and they've raised their print prices too. I've noticed that, because this is a weird price target because 9.99 is one of those, subconscious, things, like it's cheaper because it's less than $10.
Mhm.
So now all of a sudden, if you're pricing at 10.99, it's way more expensive than something at
Yeah.
9.99. You know what
Well,
I
now
mean?
I'm
It's just,
back to
it
being
seems
mad.
cheaper.
Thanks, JD.
I mean, well,
Uh,
well, I don't know. You like normally when I price these things out, like I tend to I ramp everything up by like $3.
yeah.
So if my print cost is 6.94, then my I'll round the price of my book up to $9, 9.94 or something. Now I'm gonna have to go a little bit higher just because of that. So I think if you think the way this is gonna play out, it's gonna force all indie authors to raise their prices, which is gonna make them more
They can still
competitive
be
with
at
the traditional books.
9.99, right?
Well, they can, but
Yikes.
nobody is, right? Everybody's gonna go higher. So their books are, indie authors are gonna be priced in the same place as the traditional guys. So they're basically gonna be losing, one of the edges that indie authors had because indie
Yeah.
authors have always priced cheaper.
Mhm.
I think the real
Now
answer
they're
here, though,
losing.
is use someone other than Amazon's KDP for your print because,
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that's the better way. I mean, and,
yeah,
and there are, we should probably do a show just on this because, even with Ingram, you can print in bulk,
yeah,
and like, that really gets your costs down. You just
Yeah,
warehouse the
bulk is,
copies somewhere.
I was gonna
Yeah,
ask if KDP is like literally like they're printing like one book at a time, because then
Yep.
those higher prices
yeah,
do make sense.
Yeah,
yeah.
Like that's hard.
It's that straight up POD model.
it is. Yeah.
They're not warehousing copies, although some people are through Amazon, and that's why you end up with these weird like, here's my $10 book selling for $900.
Right.
That
Yeah.
happens too. But yeah, no, they're literally it goes into a run. It's kind of interesting to watch if you ever get a chance to go tour one of these printers that does POD. Like sometimes you'll have like an array of books, different books printing on one run, but they all have to kind of fit. Like it all has to use the same kind
Yeah.
of paper and the same size covers and things like that. But
A lot of those
really
places
interesting.
are in Las Vegas. When you flip to the back of the book, it'll say printed in Las Vegas.
Hmm,
Weirdly. I don't know why, but I have noticed that that seems to be a trend.
that is interesting. Well, speaking of trends, See, I do that, and the story has nothing to do with trends, but or does it? The vicious cycle that could be considered a trend. The vicious cycle of book publishing. 25 plus years veteran of the publishing industry, Kathleen Schmidt explained book publishing cycles in her latest Substack post. As we approach the halfway point of the year, she explained what happens with most big publishers at this point every year and why. Mid-year is gut check time for big five imprints. They decide whether they are comfortably on target or scrambling for extra revenue. Short files trigger gap fill moves where editors hunt for finished or nearly finished manuscripts they can crash onto a fall list. Excuse me. Shift on early ready spring book forward. See, I coughed and now I'm off track. Or acquire quick hit titles. Anything that can ship before December 31 and count toward the annual unit goal. Over acquiring is baked into the system because tomorrow's breakout backlist titles can't be predicted. Imprints routinely buy more books than they can fully market. Some titles are published with the quiet hope they'll simply add a few thousand units to the tally. Authors feel the ripple effect. A June budget review can upgrade a mid-list book if the house needs it, or push a big launch back if numbers are already met. Watching for concrete marketing plans by early summer and asking your agent to press for them helps you gauge whether you're a priority or a placeholder. Ouch.
This whole
So
article was interesting. Like it's really long. It's worth going in and reading. Um, I know we've talked about backlist before, that backlist is where the publishers make their profit, but this just again is highlighting that backlist sales can underwrite frontline efforts, which I find
Yeah.
well,
interesting and I don't know, disheartening, I guess.
there
Well,
are
I
ways
don't
for
know.
authors to capitalize on this, because I've had friends that have gotten these phone calls. You know, like if you're one
Yeah.
of those authors where you go through a very rigorous process before you turn in your book, you know, so it doesn't need edits anymore. It doesn't really need copy edits. It's just it's almost a finished product by the time you turn it in. You're going to be on that phone call list. You know, so because
Mhm.
they are looking for these things because they don't have time to do all that stuff. But if you regularly turn in books that don't need all of that work, they know that you're a go-to person where you can give them a book. They might have to spend maybe a week or two on it, and then they can get it right in the pipeline. I know a lot of authors that used to churn out a lot of titles and make a little extra dough on that because
Yeah.
they'd slip in 2 or 3 titles. A lot of times under different pen names because these are the kind of people that write really fast and really clean.
Yeah.
But you can take advantage of this.
Yeah, I was gonna
Hmm.
say it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. I mean, even if you're
Yeah.
not like a known name, I mean, it could be the thing that gets you, published faster, which isn't, I mean, marketing budgets are kind of crazy, but you can always capitalize on that. And you can always push that. It's getting on the lists and getting out there and getting your book out there and developing the relationship with the editor and all those things that can help. And like JD said, if like the editor like knows that you're a go-to and it does decent sales, like that could be the thing that actually helps your, you know,
So do you think it's
consistent.
worthwhile to, if, because I see that as a strategy that a lot of the people in the sort of indie author space could probably benefit from. But like, if you went and sort of marketed yourself in a way to agents and publishers as I'll be your Huckleberry, I'll be your placeholder. Uh, do you think that's worthwhile?
I
I
think
don't
that
think you
it's
could market
always
your
worth getting on base.
Yeah, I don't think you could market yourself that way because it's more about, proof of concept. So if you've already
Yeah.
turned in 2 or 3 books, and your agent have seen, had like zero, comments on it, your editor has had to do very little work. You end up at basically a word of mouth, kind of thing going on at the publisher.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do, and this is probably more for the trad world too, but if you're like a series author, and you typically put in your one book a year in your series, and that's the thing the publisher expects from you, this is a very good time to slip in that secondary project that you've been wanting to write, or maybe you did write and it's sitting on your hard drive somewhere and you're trying to figure out when to release it. Call your editor, call your agent, later in the year, like after June 1st, and kind of bring up, hey, I've got this, young adult book that I put together. Just see where that goes because they're more likely going to, jump on it the second half of the year versus first half of the year, I guess is what I'm getting
Yeah.
at.
I guess
Yeah.
I would just say that, Like if you kind of take like the good and the bad out of it and like, everything can be an opportunity. Like it doesn't have to be
That's
a bad thing.
that's
Like
the
it
way I
can
see it.
be what it is and you can
Look,
take
the
advantage of
moral
that.
Yeah.
is write more books. That's the moral.
That is the
Write
moral.
more books.
I'm trying, Kevin.
uh, Next up, BookCon will return in 2026. ReedPop will launch the fan-centric book festival BookCon on April 18th through 19th, 2026 in New York, 5 years after shelving it during the pandemic shutdowns. Jenny Martin says the new BookCon won't resemble the old industry-facing Book Expo. It's purely for readers, not a trade show. Expect signings, panels, sprayed edge workshops, swaps, cosplay friendly fantasy ball, and other fandom first programming. ReedPop credits the explosive growth of TikTok and Instagram bookish communities for the decision to revive the show, aiming squarely at Gen Z and millennial women. Consultant Lynn Vlahos has begun courting publishing houses and promises submission guidelines for author appearances and panels next week as ReedPop tops its Comic-Con mailing list to jumpstart early ticket sales.
I
Taps
think
is
this
what
is
I meant to say.
fantastic. They Book Expo was like the week ahead of BookCon, but BookCon was largely like people went to it. People went crazy for it. And it was like the book convention of the year. I know in the bookish community, like Bookstagram, people were devastated that it wasn't coming back. So I think this is fantastic.
Yeah.
See that I'm gonna take this full circle because this is how it happens. Like I'm looking at this, I'm like, hey, that sounds like a lot of fun. I want to go to that.
Yeah.
So like I'm gonna probably reach out to somebody. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, we'd love to have you. And before you know it, that's all lined up. And then in April, I'm like, oh crap, I got to go to New York.
Right.
But
Yep.
this
Yeah.
actually sounds like a very fun thing to go to. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never went to it before in any of
Really?
the iteration. Yeah, so
I
I
went
might give
the
it a shot.
year before the final year. So, and it was a lot of fun. Like you'll just be like standing around and then all of a sudden there's like a secret drop happening. And
Yeah.
like maybe you get the book or maybe you don't, but it's like, there's like scavenger hunts and like people are going around and there's author signings and it's just
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. And because it's like in the center of it's at Javits, so it's publishing's mecca.
Yeah.
You end up with like agents and editors and just it's just wonderful.
The vibe I
I'm
get
just
from
so
this is
happy it's back.
it's a lot like, because I've done in the past, I've done like Comic Cons, things like that. And there's an energy to that because
Yeah.
you're there because the fans are there.
Yeah.
And it's really a good opportunity to be discovered by new fans, but only if you got to have that sort of carnival barker energy going, wherever you
Yeah.
are. You got to be able to draw them in, which I like to do. So I need to
Yeah.
be going to more of
It
these.
is sort of like the Comic-Con, but it's just for books. Like Comic-Con has like their bookish stuff at it, but like this is just like it's pure books. And then because it's like the one place, like some conventions might have some agents and might have some editors, but like I think almost all of them go or did at least, the ones in New York. Like
Yeah.
it was very rare that you would not just accidentally bump into an industry professional. So
Yeah.
it's worth it if
So
you
are we
can
all
go.
going, Jenna?
I
I
think
think we need a Writers Inc. presence at this
I
thing.
think we
There we
do.
go.
I think we do.
It's decided.
You can lure me out of my cave with very few things, but BookCon might be it.
Yay. I want a secret drop. I don't even care what it is. I just want someone to secret drop me something.
Yeah, they're just fun. Like you could just happen to be standing at the table and all of a sudden they'll just be like, "Do you want to get in line for this?" And you're like, "Okay."
I want to set off like the alarms, like you're the 100th customer. I want stuff like that to happen. Secret
I'm bringing it.
drop.
I'm bringing
Yeah.
an air horn.
Perfect.
Bring your air horn. You've got all the like fancy signage and stuff too, where you've got
Mhm.
like the spinning signs and all that stuff.
I do, yeah. Like I bought this thing in at Author Nation in Vegas, and like it's literally still sitting in the box in my office. I haven't taken it out yet, but I need to figure out how this thing works because it's like a 3D hologram something or other, and I'm sure we'll
Oh,
end up using it
yeah.
at some point.
I
Yeah.
remember when you bought that. Did you buy more than one of them? So you can
I
make
bought
it like,
3 of them because you can
yeah,
sync them all together. So like all 3 boxes are piled up right over there.
cool.
So
All right. So the
All
trick
right.
is hang out with JD at this thing.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be your, ironically, I can be your Barker, JD.
perfect.
Hey, this is Kevin Tumlinson, and it seems to me like you might need a little help. Maybe hand off all that stuff that's keeping you from writing. At Author Anchor, we connect authors with skilled, affordable virtual assistants trained specifically for the publishing world. Your personal VA handles everything from book production to marketing and social media, freeing you up to focus on what matters most, your writing. Book a discovery call today and we'll find that perfect VA for you. Plus, mention the Writers Inc. podcast and you'll get $50 off your first month. Visit authoranchor.com and get matched with your personal VA so you can just write.
Oh, on that note, JD, who is that this week?
This week we've got Peter Brown on. Peter's the New York Times bestselling author of the Wild Robot children's series, the first of which spawned a fantastic movie. His latest book is called The Wild Robot on the Island and releases June 24th. He's one of the most successful children's authors working today. I am honestly very excited to hear this one. Here he is, Peter Brown.
Well, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot to talk about today. Very popular movie, old books, new books. But before we dive into that, we like to always start at the beginning and ask, what is your writer origin story? How did you get started writing?
I came to writing through illustration, actually, because I always loved art ever since I was a little kid, like most kids. Once I could pick up a crayon, I was like drawing pictures, but for whatever reason, I just kept drawing, while other kids kind of moved on to other interests. I stayed with art
Yeah.
and drawing. And the things I like to draw were like characters, doing things like an alien rock band, right, playing on stage, or like a monkey detective, or it was always like these quirky little characters and stuff. I loved cartoons, I loved books when I was a kid, and so I was just kind of mimicking sort of the stuff I was seeing. At the time, I didn't think of that as like storytelling, but looking back on it now, I could see how that was the early days of me becoming a storyteller, inventing characters and putting them in little situations. And so um, I didn't actually start writing until later. Probably when I was in high school, I took some creative writing classes, and then to college, I went to art school and studied illustration, but took some creative writing classes in college. So I was starting to realize that I wanted to combine words and pictures somehow, and eventually took a children's book class, like a picture book class,
Mhm.
and really felt like I was getting close to what I wanted to do. Like there's something about the balance of words and pictures in a picture book in particular versus like comics or graphic novels or
Right.
animation or whatever. There's something about the picture book format that really felt right to me for my sensibilities, the kinds of stories and characters I was coming up with. And so I started taking writing more seriously at that point, and made picture books for a while, which of course is real writing, but eventually moved on to longer form with
Mhm.
my Wild Robot series as my first novel. So now I'm a like I'm an illustrator who sometimes writes novels also.
Yeah, I think that is so interesting. What you just said about how picture books in particular, like the art works with the story. I mean, in graphic novels, it sort of does, but you are right. It's not necessarily quite the same because kids need the pictures as much as they
Mhm.
need the words for that context. That's a
Yeah.
really interesting type of storytelling. It's very,
Yeah. Well, and the young age felt fun too, right? The readers being typically picture books are like 4 to 8 year olds.
Mhm.
Um, they're especially the 6, 7, 8 year olds, they're old enough to get my jokes. They're old enough to get some of the subtler things that are happening in the story, but they still are young. They still have big imaginations. And the younger kids, may not understand every little nuance, but they're in it for the big, interesting pictures, you know, and the illustrations. So I don't know. There's something really fun about that age group where you can do a lot. Obviously, there's real limitations on what content and vocabulary and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's a really fun age to work to create for, and that was part of the appeal to me. It was like it's a fun audience, and actually doing events. I didn't know this at the time, but I spent a lot of time doing events, bookstore events, libraries, school visits, that kind of thing. And like I said, I didn't know this before I got published, but I do a lot of that stuff, and they're such a fun audience when you're actually in person with them versus
Yeah.
adults, right? Like I've done events like for adults, and adults are cool, I guess, but kids are awesome, right? Like kids are
Yeah.
so fun because they actually laugh out loud. They're not inhibited. Like just you know where you stand. And if you're bombing, you know that too, right? Because
Right.
they'll yawn loudly, right? And you'll know that they're tired and bored, and it's like, oh my gosh. Uh so anyway, it's a fun, everything about making books for kids is fun.
Yeah, yeah. Kids will let you know exactly where you stand, for better or worse.
Yeah.
So, what does your writing process look like then? I imagine it would vary based on the work that you're doing and the type of project you're working on. How does that
Yeah.
shake out for your day to day?
Well, you know, some of between the picture books and the novels that I write, there are some consistencies actually between the two. For example, I do this thing you know, we call story mapping, where I'm basically plotting the story. And I started doing that with picture books, where I would do this kind of a flow chart to figure out the sequence of events for my picture book. And when I started working on the Wild Robot books, that story mapping technique was so helpful that I decided, of course, this would work for a novel also. So I
Mhm.
was storing that. I story mapped. I probably spent a year mapping out the story for the Wild Robot, the first book in the series, because first of all, I was dragging my feet a little bit because I had never written a novel before and was kind of nervous and didn't know if I had the skills to pull it off. So I was like, I want to understand every little detail in this entire thing before I really dive into the writing. So I spent a lot of time mapping out the story, which is a technique that really works for my way of thinking. And then um, you know, and then after that, things get a little different. Like with a picture book, I'm bouncing back and forth between sketching illustrations, figuring out what each scene is going to look like visually. And then I figure out what are the words that I need to fill in the gaps, right? Like what can't this picture do? And then I use words to do what can't be done with the illustrations. And sometimes the illustrations can do everything, and I don't have any words on that particular page, right? Um, Whereas in a novel, obviously the words are doing the heavy lifting. Even though my novels have some illustrations, it's more about the words. Um, and so for them, you know, after I've mapped out the whole story and I understand what's going to happen in every chapter, you know, I outline everything, and I my outline, every plot point of my outline is its own chapter. And so I have a lot of chapters. You know, my books typically have like 80 or 90 chapters.
Yeah.
And it works for me to know this is the goal of chapter 3. This is the goal of chapter 20, right? This is what has to happen in chapter 32. And then I dive in and that's kind of where you know, where how do I say this? I don't know exactly what's going to happen once I dive into chapter 32. Like I know what I
Right.
need. I know what I need. The goal of the chapter is clear to me, but how I get there is still kind of up for me to figure out, you know. And so that can be a little scary sometimes if I'm not quite sure how I'm going to make it work, or it can be, you know, pretty straightforward if I know exactly how I want to get from point A to point B in that particular chapter. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing. Like I didn't study writing much, and so I kept thinking to myself, there's probably systems in place. Like if I'd studied writing more seriously, I probably would have addressed these various ways, you know, mapping out a story
Yeah.
and the writing process. There's probably like people have figured this stuff out, and yet here I am kind of reinventing the wheel because I didn't know any better, you know.
Yeah, I don't
So
know. I mean, yes, there's like a lot of different ways to tackle it, but I mean, it depends on who you talk to, right? Like some authors just sort of write with the end in mind, and that's their map, is just, this is how the story is going to end. What's going to happen in between? We don't know.
Yeah. Oh man,
You
that
know?
sounds terrifying to me.
Yeah, I've done it that way. Yes, I do not, 0 stars, do not recommend. It's not great. I
Uh,
like the idea of story mapping, though. I mean, I know a lot of people call it plotting, and it's probably very similar, but I do like the idea of your outline as a map.
mhm.
When it comes to doing your picture books, and even you said that Wild Robot has some illustrations in it, do you include illustrations? Like, do you start with like an image in mind? I guess I'm kind of curious about how the art element of storytelling and then the word part of storytelling kind of works in your brain. I think it's quite fascinating.
Well, with picture books, it's always kind of different, like I made it. Wrote and illustrated a picture book called The Curious Garden, which is about a boy in a gray, dreary city who becomes a gardener, and he starts growing these like wildflowers all over the place, and other people get involved, and the whole city transforms into this garden city. But that whole thing started with just me walking around New York City where I lived at the time. I discovered the High Line before it became a park. It was just this kind of abandoned elevated railway with weeds and wildflowers and trees and stuff growing. And I was starting to notice like where things like little plants were growing in cracks in the sidewalk. And I just started noticing how nature pops up in kind of surprising places. And so I started filling my sketchbook with drawings of those types of scenes, just like a little forest growing on top of a skyscraper,
Yeah.
like buildings being completely abandoned buildings, completely overgrown with like vines and weeds and like those scenes. My sketchbooks were just filled with that, and I didn't really know where the story was going, but I gradually kind of pieced it together and started imagining myself as a kid discovering a place kind of like this, and slowly but surely the story came together. But it all started with drawings and sketches in my sketchbook. Other times, I wrote and illustrated a picture book called Children Make Terrible Pets. And that started with a sentence, right? Like that started with a sentence. I won't remember the wording exactly, but it was basically like a wild animal brings home a boy to be its pet, something like that. Because I was thinking about when I was a kid and I would bring like little turtles and frogs and stuff home to my house
Right,
to be a
yeah.
pet that I'd find out in the woods. And I thought it'd be funny to kind of reverse the roles and have a boy be the one who's brought home to be a pet for this wild animal. And so the bear named Lucy finds him. Anyway, so every picture book is different, and yeah, I never know exactly where the ideas are going to come or how they're going to come together. One of the really exciting things about making picture books is that as both an author and an illustrator, it is unpredictable. Like I don't know how I'm going to spend my day. I might think I'm going to spend it writing, but I end up spending it drawing, or or doing research or something like that. Um, and it's because I can both write and illustrate that I can bounce back and forth between these two different parts
Yeah.
of the picture book. That is a lot of fun, and it gives me a lot of creative freedom.
Yeah, and you also do collaborations where someone else writes the story and you illustrate the books. How does that partnership work?
It's funny. So I've done that with a few times, mostly with an author named Aaron Reynolds. We do this creepy series of picture
Yeah.
books. And actually, we have a spin-off series of creepy early readers that are coming out starting in September. Um, but those are really fun because they're much less stressful for me. When I'm doing everything, it's all on me, and I get nervous that I'm going to make a mistake, and it can be a little daunting at times. But when I work with Aaron, he writes the whole manuscript, and he's flexible enough. He knows that once I start illustrating it, we can revisit the text. Maybe some descriptions won't be necessary because I'm showing it clearly in the illustrations, So he's not like, the text isn't absolutely set in stone, but it's pretty finished when I get it.
Hmm.
And I get to kind of have fun figuring out how to visualize this story, and hopefully finding ways of enhancing the text, adding some details that may not be in the text, but make the text even more interesting. Sometimes it can be really fun if the illustrations and the text conflict with each other, right? Like if the text says one thing and the picture shows something very different, that that can be really funny if you do it right,
Yeah.
And so it's not just that I'm taking his words and absolutely mirroring what the words say. I'm trying to expand upon them, add to them, enhance it in some way with the pictures. That's the goal anyway.
Yeah.
So
That
so
sounds
that can be a lot of fun. And like I said, it's a lot less stressful. So it's been great for me in the last few years because I've kind of bounced between wild robot books and these creepy books with Aaron. The wild robot books are all mine, but they're also really stressful. And and so when I'm finished with one of those, then I illustrate one of these creepy books for Aaron. And it's so much less stressful and it's just kind of fun. It's like a different part of my brain. So I feel really lucky that I get to have both of these projects.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice balance, like a nice
It
outlet.
is.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of the Wild Robot, that book has enjoyed tremendous success from publication to now the movie. Um, and now you are releasing an adaptation of the adaptation, taking the middle grade novels into picture book form. How did that come about?
Well, I it's funny, when I first wrote The Wild Robot, the novel, I thought at the very beginning, I thought it might be a picture book because that's the only kind of book I'd ever made. I just had this idea about a robot in the wilderness, and I figured, well, I'll figure out how to turn this into a picture book. But as I did research and a lot of thinking and writing and exploring with my ideas, I realized that the ideas in my novel in The Wild Robot were really interesting and layered and complex, too big to fit into a picture book. And so I decided to write my first novel. And then I wrote a few more Wild Robot novels. But with time and a little space, a little distance between me, I've started to see how I could possibly retell Roz the robot's like origin story in a more visual picture book format. I didn't see that in the beginning right away.
Mhm.
It took a little time, but you know, I I realize now, like, what are the absolute key moments in the story that are essential for this whole idea to make sense? And can I strip everything else away except for those really essential moments? And does that work as a story on its own? And it turns out it does. It's a different story. It's a much simpler story, of course. But I was excited about the idea of revisiting that world and showing readers how Roz becomes the wild robot rather than telling them how she becomes the wild robot
Yeah.
with words, right? Like I know the whole like rule, like show don't tell with writing, and I absolutely believe that. But you know what I'm trying to say is like the
Yeah.
words are explaining how Roz becomes the wild robot in the actual novel. But I thought let's show readers exactly what I see in my imagination. Um, And because when I was writing the novel, I was seeing everything pretty clearly in my mind, colors, textures, different plants and uh, compositions, scenes where Roz is sitting a certain way in a certain place. But I could only sprinkle illustrations throughout the novel. With the picture book, I really got to dive in and fully show readers what I'm seeing in my own mind. And that to me was really exciting. I thought it'd be a great way for younger readers to be introduced to the wild robot world, and hopefully readers who are actually already fans of the novels will enjoy seeing Roz in a whole new way, up close and personal and detail and color. I really pushed color as much as I could. The illustrations in the novels are black and white, except for the
Hmm.
cover art. Everything else is black and white. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this picture book, color's got to be really important. Like I gotta push it as far as I can and make the color really interesting and powerful. Um, so it was a fun creative challenge for me. And obviously there's a lot of love for the wild robot these days. And so I thought, maybe readers would actually want something like this. And so I decided to go for it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, my nephew is a huge fan of both the novel and the movie, and he had a question that he had asked me when he first saw the movie,
Mhm.
because he knows that I do books. He's very
Yeah,
excited to find out I was talking to you
nice.
about the mama bear and the two cubs turning into the grumpy old man bear in the movie.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, hot topic there for
Oh
for
man.
the young ones.
Well, God, it's such a weird thing to have a movie based on my book, or for an
Yeah.
author to have a movie based on their book. It's so exciting. I feel so lucky. It's drawn so much attention to the books. Um, but they mess with the story. Like they don't
Yeah.
translate it one to one. It's like, and they can't really. Like it's an impossible task because they're very different art forms.
Hmm.
Some changes are absolutely inevitable, and as the author and the illustrator of the books, I just have to sort of grin and bear it, because there's nothing I can do. I'm not working on the movie. I had a lot of conversations with the filmmakers throughout the 4 years it took them to make the animated film. Where they were asking me questions and picking my brain and trying to understand all of my decisions that I made with the books. Um, but then they go off and they make their own version of that idea, of that kind of
Yeah.
basic concept. So one of the changes was the bears. There's other characters. One of my favorite characters from the novels is a squirrel named Chit Chat, and there's no Chit Chat in the movie, and
Hmm.
that's a bummer. Even though I told them many times that Chit Chat was important to the readers and to me, and I thought you should try to find a way, and they tried to find a way to include Chit Chat, but they just couldn't because they have to streamline this thing as much as they possibly can. And that's what happened with the bears. They thought, do we really need three bears? Maybe we can condense these three different bear characters kind of into one bear character and have that single character do the stuff basically that the three did in the book. And it's not a crazy idea, right? Like if you're looking to streamline the story, that seems kind of like a reasonable change to make.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what they did. And so Mama Bear and Nettle and Thorn, her two cubs, became one bear character named Thorn, who is, yeah, like kind of an old man bear character, kind of grumpy. And I will say Mark Hamill did the voice for Thorn the bear, and so that made me feel a little better about Thorn because I love Mark Hamill, and so that was pretty
Yeah.
sweet.
Well, Duncan is a big Star Wars fan too, so it hurt a little
Yeah,
bit less, I think.
yeah,
That's
for me too.
a nice little like, well, we're sorry about
Yeah,
that.
right.
So, what has been the biggest surprise over the course of your career?
Oh, that's a good one. Let's see. I think the biggest surprise for me has been um, the Wild Robot for sure. It's by far my most successful book and series. And I wasn't sure when I was writing it if anybody was going to care, if anybody was going to like it. I remember talking to my editor just before the book was published back in 2016, and I was just like, what is going to happen? Is anybody going to understand what I'm trying to do with this story? And she was like, I don't know. She was like, she said, to be fair, she was like, Peter, I think you did a great job. I love this story, but the market is fickle. Like you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and what's been really surprising and really heartening to me is that these young readers really love these characters and the stories go to really surprising places. There's a lot of depth that you wouldn't expect in the Wild Robot series, which was one of the reasons I wanted to make it in the first place, was to surprise readers with how much they feel in a robot story, how much emotion
Yeah.
gets dredged up in these different scenes because they're relatable. And it's been surprising and heartening to see young readers, really get it and really understand and really not only can they handle it, but they want it. They want the truth. They want depth. They want to be told. They don't want to be sugar-coated. They don't want things to be sugar-coated. And I didn't sugarcoat things. There's death in these books. There's family separation. There's issues of bullying and assimilation into different communities. Like it goes to some really shocking places, and these young kids just eat it up. And so I didn't know if that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it surprised me when it happened to such an extraordinary degree. And it's changed my life. I mean, those books absolutely changed my life with the success and the attention and obviously the sales and the financial side of things is great. And it wouldn't have happened if young readers weren't up to the challenge of what I was trying to do with this weird story about a robot becoming a single mom in the wilderness for a goose. It's like, what? Why? I don't
Well,
know.
it happens. You know?
Well, the thing is, the way I think reason why kids are into it is because I walk them through the step-by-step process, right? What seems like a completely outlandish idea, I say, well, here's the baby steps. Here's how we got
Yeah.
from point A to point B. I don't just throw you into the thick of it. I say, here's a robot that looks and seems like what you would expect a robot to be. And now we're going to watch this gradual progression as she gradually becomes wild and natural and learns to speak with these animals and develops relationships with the animals, including adopting an orphan gosling and eventually becomes the wild robot. Like, I'm holding their hand, I'm walking them through this process, but they're so into it that it's like it's still it still kind of blows my mind that I got away with
Yeah.
this.
Well, yeah, I know, my nephew, but a lot of kids just really, really adore the book, the movie, all of it. So you touched on this a little bit, but because you are writing to kids, I think that this question is a little more poignant, perhaps, than it is for people who are writing to adults. But what do you hope your readers take away from your work?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. Being an author of any kind of book is an opportunity to put your energy into the universe, right? To put your ideas out there. And, you know, I want kids to basically be open-minded and curious and kind.
Mhm.
Um, and I want them to laugh. I want them to be like rich, have rich, full lives. But man, I look at the world today and I just think, what happened, man? Where did we go wrong? Because there is some mixed messages. We For years we've told kids that bullying is bad. You go into elementary schools and you see posters about it, and there's like workshops, and everybody's talking about how bullying is bad. And then we live in a world now where we see a lot of bullies in the limelight, in the spotlight. And so what are kids supposed to do with that, right? Like how are they supposed to navigate this whole situation? And so I really try hard with my books to show kids the value of being kind to each other and being open-minded and curious, like
Mhm.
you don't have to understand everything. It's okay to ask questions, right? Like ask questions, make mistakes. But if you can come from a place of like sort of a generous spirit, like a kindness behind your questions, you can't really go wrong. And
Mhm.
so I'm constantly trying to push that sort of positivity into my books and into kids' minds. And it sounds cliche, but I mean,
Oh,
God, we
I
need it.
yeah.
We need it. So I'm like all for it. If it's cliche, I'm guilty. I don't care. Like, let's pull ourselves together and be decent to each other because
Yeah.
that seems to be slipping away a little bit.
Yeah. I love that. And I definitely think that that comes across very clearly in your work. Um, as we are reaching the end, we do always like to cap our interviews off with this question. What's one piece of advice you'd give to new or aspiring writers?
Hmm. You know what really helps me is, and this is makes a little more sense for kids authors, but I think this holds true for all authors, is I read my words out loud all the time. I'm
Yeah.
constantly reading my stuff out loud because it forces me to recognize where there's little speed bumps in my writing. If I literally tripping, if my tongue is having a hard time saying a combination of words, I think to myself, well, maybe I'll just change this combination of words and make that smooth that out. And what
Hmm.
happens is a lot of people when they're reading, they might be mouthing the words a little bit. Like I think even if they're reading silently, I still think there's value to taking that extra step of smoothing out the way your words sound. It forces you to think a little differently about your wording. And I think one of the reasons my Wild Robot books have been so successful is that kids tell me that the books are really fun to listen to being read aloud to them. But they can read them on their own because I've polished everything off. Everything is like a smooth experience for the reader. And to me, that's important. I want kids to keep reading, and the experience of reading has to be fun for them and not any harder than it needs to be. I don't want them struggling. I don't want it to be feel like a chore. And I think a lot of adult readers are the same way. I mean,
Yeah,
how many adults actually read books that fully booked, from the start to finish anymore? I don't know, not as many as there should be. So
I agree with that. Yeah.
maybe there's some value to treating adults a little more like kids in the way that you write for them. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that I read my books out loud from start to finish, which is quite the adventure on your vocal cords. But
yeah.
your ear catches things that your eyes will sort of skip over, and so that's a
Hmm.
good piece of advice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Nice.
being here today. I just had such a delightful time talking to you, and I
Uh,
hope everyone continues to enjoy your books and your series. And if more wild robot movies are on the way, I'm sure the world would love that too.
Stay tuned. I think there's a lot more Wild Robot stuff coming down the pipeline. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
This was such a interesting conversation, just because I don't know that we've had like a lot of picture book and, kidlit specific interviews, but the idea of using like actual drawings to like map your story, I thought was like fun and interesting. Do you guys like draw or do anything that would even be remotely like quote unquote artistic
Oh, yeah.
other than the writing?
I
You
believe
don't
we
want to see me
discussed
draw.
my stick figures.
Hey, you
Uh,
can do a lot with stick figures. There's an account
you
on
can.
Bookstagram who does all book stick figures.
I draw and have for a while. I used to want to be a comic book artist when I was a kid. That's one of the jobs that I
Fascinating, Kevin.
never quite went into. And somehow I'm connected to a ton of people in the comic book industry, and still can't find a way to crack in. So
Would you
I'm
ever do illustrations in your book? Because I know sometimes special editions will do that, even with adult titles. Like Stephen King books will end up like with some illustrations, which I think is an
yeah,
interesting thing to think about. Would you guys ever do that in your books?
yeah,
Even
I
if I
think I
could
would.
draw, I don't know that I would do it.
I mean, if you
When
What
have
what's
someone
the
else
what's
put
the
it
hang
in.
up, JD? Why would you not want to do it?
I don't know. It feels like a very different skill set. I've never been that good as far as drawing, so that's
Well,
probably it.
would you use someone else's art in your
Yeah,
books? Yeah.
I think I
Okay.
might do that. I mean, my main concern there is, like even when I write a story, I try not to describe characters and places too much. Like I just plant a couple of the
Mhm.
seeds because I prefer to rely on the subconscious of whoever's reading to fill in those like the visual gaps. Because one of the things I learned very early on is if you tell a person what a character looks like, their mind is already made up what that person looks like,
Right.
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden you're taking them out of the story, and
Yeah.
it's funny because like I put very little detail when it comes to that, but a lot of my reviews say that my books are very visual and they draw this out
Right.
and draw that out.
Yeah.
It's really coming from their own mind. I think what I find unique about this though is like Peter is doing his own illustrations,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so he's basically got the perfect trifecta of stuff going on because not only is he a really good children's writer, which is very difficult to do to write to that
Mhm.
particular audience, but his actual drawings grab the kids just as much as his written words do.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he mentioned the other series where he just does illustrations, and like that series is a fan favorite over at our elementary school.
Hmm.
And the kids have no clue who the actual author is or who's drawing those pictures, but those books are flying off the shelf. So there's something there that grabs them, something in his drawings, and and
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's got the words and the story, like all he's like I said, the trifecta.
I
Yeah.
do think it's really interesting what you just said. Like in picture books, the pictures actually act as a part of the story. But when you go to adult books, even the ones that have like illustrations in them, the illustrations are almost like extra, it's like
Yeah.
fan art almost instead of
Yeah.
actually like being a cohesive part of the story.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting to add another layer to storytelling, I guess. And I wonder if you could do that in an adult book. I don't, maybe you
So
I
can't.
was
Maybe it's a
thinking that
comic
we
book.
we do it, but like differently because I think when we talk about books being cinematic, it's like what do I really
Yeah.
want the reader to see in their mind with this scene? And it may not be like what somebody looks like, but it's the concrete visual details of that scene. And
Yeah.
and I think, he talked about that maybe a little bit with goals of the scene too. What's the goal of the scene? What's it look
Mhm.
like from a camera shot? And then what words do I
Yeah.
need to fill that in? I think we
Yeah.
kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
I just finished rereading Slaughterhouse-Five, which I hadn't read in years, but he would occasionally do these little doodles that went in his books. And
I could actually see where this would work because if you're writing a scene, you get stuck, maybe you start to doodle, you start
Yeah.
drawing out these little things, and then maybe that trips your brain into getting you to that next place. So I could see that working.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
drawn
You
out
know,
things for like maps of like houses when I'm doing a scene, like where's this room?
I
I
I
do
do
those
that
kind
too,
of
yeah,
things. Yeah,
for especially for like apartments and houses,
yeah,
anything where you're gonna have to refer to, kitchen is over here, bedrooms over here, that kind of
exactly.
yeah,
stuff. It's
Yeah.
I don't know if this qualifies or not, but like I do, one of the ways that I sort of mentally finish a book is to create a cover, whether that cover ends up being the one used or not. Like I sort of illustrate something that's in my head that not necessarily a scene from the book, because that doesn't usually make a good cover, but the sort of essence of the story. So that's part of what I do. And a lot of times that does end up being the cover, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, it's sort of like I know people, I have a friend who does like mood boards,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
for drafts and stuff, and it's just sort of like, this mashup of different images that just sort of like have the vibes. And for a while on Twitter, they had like pitch contests where,
With
that
mood
was like
boards.
a way that you could include, like a little graphic of these
Yeah,
different images to like kind of help sell your idea. So it is an interesting way of just adding to the creativity, I think.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people post those on Pinterest,
Yeah,
after
yeah.
the fact. And honestly, like I've been using, playing with the various like ChatGPT and Grok and stuff for visuals. So like I'll take a character description that I've created, drop it into Grok, and say, give me a picture of this person. I've done the same thing where I've dropped in a scene. Like I'm writing a book right now that takes place in a cabin. So I dropped in the first chapter and had Grok give me a picture of what that cabin looks like. And I've got it up on a TV in my office where I can actually, just kind of glance up and see it, and kind of just, helps me stay grounded in the story to be able to see those same faces and the, the
yeah,
places and things like that. I suppose I probably should put all that up on Pinterest because that's what everybody else does. I've
yeah,
never done that before.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's kind of
Bonus content.
interesting. I like because you think about like fan art and stuff, and there's people who, they really like when a series gets popular or a book gets popular, like the first thing you start seeing is, their own drawings. And
Yeah.
sometimes you look at a drawing and you think like, yeah, I get it. And sometimes you're like, wow, like that's not how I saw the character at all. And I think like no matter what the reaction is, it's just so interesting how people react and interact with it. And I suppose that's the same thing with kids. I did love what he said about kids being a brutal audience.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, kids are tough, like
Yeah.
anybody who's got a kid, like, with like children's books, like you may think it's the greatest book ever as an adult. When you pick it up at the store, you bring it home and your kid hears it one time and it's done. And then
Yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
this other book that, the story means nothing to you as an adult. Your child wants to hear it, 200 times. Like they just can't get
Hmm.
enough of it. And again, like Peter somehow managed to grab that magic formula because they eat up those words. Like I've literally seen like the teacher at my daughter's second grade class reading Wild Robot, and those kids are just staring at her,
Yeah.
completely mesmerized by that story.
Are you
Yeah.
guys brave enough to ask a room full of 8-year-olds their honest opinion about you? I don't know if I am.
Oh,
Yeah, I
I
got
get
no
them all the
problem with
time in my job. I get their honest opinions. So I work with kids.
That's true,
I've
you
talked,
do.
I've done some talks at schools, middle schools and things like that.
Middle school are
'Cause
not 8-year-olds. Middle school is when they're
I've got some.
starting to learn that they actually have to be socially polite. 8-year-olds are like third grade, and like they're the group that like if you're talking and they're bored will loudly yawn or like say in their full outside voice, "I'm bored. When is this going to be over?"
well, to be fair,
Christine
that's
knows.
I
whenever I
know,
watch
believe me,
a
I
movie
know.
or something with Kara, I got to deal with that same thing. She's always telling me how bored she is. So I'm used to that.
Okay, that's good. JD, who's up next week?
Wow. Next week, we've got Ewan Morrison coming on. He's an award-winning novelist and screenwriter. He also writes for The Guardian, The Times, and The Daily Mail. His latest novel is called For Emma, which releases on June 17th.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.